Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask all the speakers of this session to come to the panel so that we can have a question and answer session. Okay, let's get started. So, Beat.
I like this panel very much, and I think when I developed it, one of the points that we discussed was that in industry, is there a difference maybe between when you start up nanomedicine companies or whether you do this in pharmaceutical industry or when you translate products? Is it so? Is there any difference? And I felt, Werner, that you have been a leader in Sanofi and you have been a leader in huge companies, and maybe you could still teach us one thing. Do you think it's a big difference between what you did in your past life and what you would do now with a company that translates nanomedicine? Is there a difference, or is this the same?
I think parts are the same, parts are different. I do believe that, as you said, I spent like 30 years in big pharma in a lot of different companies. I'm a scientist by background. What I see happening today is that there is a risk-adverse, or there is a lack of entrepreneurial approaches for certain novel technologies in larger pharmaceutical companies. There are some of my colleagues on the left here. We can debate it later. It's at some point in time you have to take a certain, and it's not a safety risk. You just have to take a risk, believe in a technology, and go all the way and bring it into the clinic and see if it works. And I think that's the difference between entrepreneurial biotechs and larger pharma. I think we do this much faster. And I think the only answer will come from patient, and the sooner we can go there, the better. And as I mentioned it before, the regulators, whether that's FDA or EMA, are extremely supportive in doing that. So we should not hide behind them. It's very often internal processes.
Thanks.
Next question. Yes, please.
I would like to ask about Montreal. You mentioned that 5 of the patients had infusion reaction. What kind of reaction were these? Procedure were these? So if you can hear about that details.
Yes, so it was not unexpected for us because we'd seen it in previous trials too. It varies from to the classical phenomena like flushing, the feeling of a pressure on the chest, nausea, things like that really. So it happens quite fast, I'd say 5 minutes after start of infusion. And we would typically lower the infusion speed or stop it, and then it goes away within 10-15 minutes. It goes away, and it stays away mostly, so it doesn't come back. And we don't see it upon repeated infusions either. So it's very well in line with what we know with liposomes and infusion reactions. It's the only surprise to us in this case was that with this particular type of patient, the bowel inflammation patient, it seemed to be more prevalent. So there may be a relation between the etiology of the disease and the chance of these reactions.
More questions? Huh? Still thinking? Oh.
Yeah, Just one short question. For the Acuren assay that you did in vitro, did you use mouse or human serum, or was it just saline that you used to test your in vitro test?
So the majority of the vitro test is sorry, is that better? No, it wasn't. It wasn't done in plasma. It was done in a buffer under sink conditions with polysorbate added to it to maintain the sink conditions.
Maybe switch off and on.
Switch off again. And now it's okay, yes. I would like to bring up an issue. Maybe it has been discussed in the beginning. I don't know. I was a little late in this session. But nanomedicine in general, I also listened to Bart, of course, to his lecture and some questions which came up, how to proceed, and also the past is not the present and maybe not the future, but how should we, and I don't know actually who to ask, maybe everybody of the panel can give a short comment on this. You see nowadays there are a lot of new drugs which are really targeted, let's say molecularly targeted drugs to inhibit certain pathways in cells, in target cells. And actually these drugs are quite successful, and many of these drugs are not very toxic too. So you can actually give quite high doses and intensive doses regimens. How should we see our nanomedicine field versus this development that these drugs are very successful? So is there in the future a strong need for nanomedicine? If we are going to focus, and if the pharma is going to focus on the development of these drugs increasingly, so to say. This is my question.
I can make one comment. I think we still think there's about 70% fail in discoveries to early preclinical development because of therapeutic index challenges. So it's still difficult with chemistry to get that therapeutic index, and it obviously depends, it's very target specific. So I still think there is a need for drug delivery and nanomedicines to improve that.
Yeah, I also think it's not the black or white situation. I think indeed still many drugs, also future drugs, in need of further improvement. And of course, pharma industry would like to develop things as simple, as fast as possible. So they look for simple formulations, but at the very end, there could still very well be a need for line extension. So the same drugs with improved formulations to further enhance the effect collected during many years of clinical experience with these drugs. So I think there are drugs still need to further improve. There are very nice drugs around on the market which still are in need of line extensions. People try that out. And I'm sure that also for new NCEs there is some need to further improve the effect of these drugs.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so and I already told that in my lecture. My limited experience is that there is not, well, especially given the new developments in oncology nowadays with small molecular therapies, new targeted therapies, like you say, and also biological products, there is maybe a little bit less appetite of big pharma for delivery of small molecular agents, really. That's what I see. I do believe, though, that we have a place, but we need to keep searching. And there is certainly, I mean, not all cancers can be treated with the new therapies. There's quite a few out there that are still very much dependent on chemotherapy. So we need to if we make decisions in our development strategy for which cancer we go, now we need to really think through clearly think through the indication that we want to go for. So what is our, maybe it's even a niche, but it's still valuable. It's still very, very much a medical need for it. So we need to have a lot of discussion internally about which cancer we go for, given all the developments out there in the field. And I think, so that is important. And I do believe there are many drugs have a position, the drugs that we want to formulate, all drugs have a position early on in the therapy, so they're not 6, 7, 8 lines, but they're first, second, third line. So if we show improvement, then with a targeted delivery system and nanomedicine, we could just jump in those early lines. That's an advantage, I think, of doing nanomedicine with old drugs too.
If I may, I also would like to add something. I think that in this field, I will, in my modest opinion, at least what I see is that the majority of the teams, what they are doing is to deliver pre-existing drugs in maybe a more safety and local composition, like can be with liposomes using the EPR or using antibodies. But I think that what we could advance is to adding additional functionalities. It's the power of the combination of having maybe biologics, low molecular weight compound, and even systems that they can be activated remotely at a local site, what can bring the power of this technology. Something that is still developing. There are several groups that they are doing, but I think that this is what will make a big difference, because all the others we could consider is the reflection, I look to you, that you have between yourself and the industry. Is a kind of dilemma that maybe these are only incremental steps. But what we need is to try to make big steps. And these big steps, usually the power is by bringing these different functionalities all together at a particular site.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. The caveat is always like that. If you come up with an old drug, okay, your system may be as complex as you want and maybe as advanced as you ever could imagine, but you're still having this old drug in there. So potential partners would still regard it a reformulation, and they would always look at the price difference between your new advanced system and what is already out there. And the more advanced it is, the more difficult it is to produce, and the more you need of a price premium to get return on investment, right? And so that is something that we really need to think about, I believe. And therefore, I showed this added value of putting off very expensive other therapies. So really looking at the pharmacoeconomics of the product. But the drawback there is so difficult to show. It's so difficult to perform clinical studies there. At least it's very expensive and takes a lot of time. So that's something we need to be aware of.
I just add there are a lot of components to answering both of those questions. I think to the last question, the wheels we have in our cars today were not the original wheels that were invented, right? You've got to start somewhere. And I think starting in a relatively simplistic space, especially when you're going through a regulatory process, if you're making one change, and that's adding something that is a biodegradable, has been in an injection before, to a known molecule, then you're testing one hypothesis. When you're talking about that robot that goes in and destroys malaria and pops around the different cells, how many different variables are there that you're trying to look at? And it may be a slower process to start with the complex. So that, you need to start somewhere, and I think we have, but you want to move on to the other. But another point to that in the previous question, and repeat what Marianne said, there are 94 potentially new drugs out there that have been abandoned, for every 6 that make it. And why is that? A lot of those are formulation issues. You can't solubilize. Well, there are nanotechnology applications that may solve that, and these drugs are just sitting there waiting. So, you know, these technologies look like their formulation, but they're much more important than that when you think that something has been abandoned because you couldn't get it to a high enough dose or it had a toxicity to the therapeutic index side.
Okay, and Doug?
A few things. First of all, I like your dialogue, the way you did the dialogue at the end. I like your data too, but the dialogue, I think it was very nice way to present the issues we're dealing with. But I think there are two things from the experience we can see around people that are dealing with drug delivery. If we look now at the irinotecan situation, at the drug that was approved recently, they charge tremendous cost, and actually they got approval in every country almost to getting into a kind of approved by the authorities, and everyone is happy to pay, because, not happy, but pay, okay? Because they give maybe hopefully some help to the patients, some improvement, and they show that they are better than other things. So I think one of the things missing in your discussion with the company is if you go, let's say, take Remicade, or take one of the antibodies, or take one of these whatever biological, and you show that you are better in a convincing way, okay, first in animal, and then even in human, then I think you have a very good cause to claim that you are on a better ground, and you bring a lot, and then they do their calculation about pricing. That's an art by its own. I mean, you should not be involved in the pricing at all. That some expert can do the pricing, and I was in some of these discussions in different places, and it's amazing how you calculate prices. It has nothing to do with reality. We all know. It just whatever they can ask for, they will do, basically. But they know what are the limits. And I think for this, you have to be very strong. And then they present the drug. You know, I have one of the inventor of Remicade in my office. He was in my office, and I just have here a poster of our steroid project. Okay, and he looked at it. He's a very, very nice guy. And he said, he looked at the comparison, and he said, well, you are better than Remicade. How come you are not on the market? Why you don't show it? We don't stress this effect. He said, as much as I think steroids are better. He said, steroids are better than Remicade, but they have problems. If you solve this problem, if you come and you convince the community that this is the case, they will go for it. So I think just the argument, of course, if you present it as a regular steroid, just improved formulation of steroid, then you can charge not 10 cents, but $1. No one will work with you for $1. Forget about it. That's not the way to do it. The way it's something new. That's the way. That's all the concept about nano. We are not just formulating, like taking PEG and, I mean, regular PEG and make it more soluble. That's not the whole purpose of the nanomedicine. The nanomedicine purpose is to change the profile of the drug, to change the way drug can reach, the way drug can do. If you don't bring this, then I mean, not you personally, you do wonderful work, but then whoever do it deserves to the kind of way the company treated them. I think that's really very critical to remember. And you have to spend effort on this. And then you have to find a way to get some money to do a convincing clinical trial. For them, we are in a catch-22 situation. We need money to do the work. And the company said, do the work, so convince us that you have something good, but they don't want to give you the money to do it.
No, certainly there are several.
We take that question.
Another comment? No?
So many years ago, when let me start it a different way. So I'm not worried about how a weakly defined field is going to develop in the future, because it's unavoidable. And many years ago, we realized, the basic scientists realized that there's a whole world there in between 1 micron and the molecular size that behaves differently that most of the time, and it's a transition, it's complicated, it's complex. And it's not the size, it's the complexity what matters. That it was obvious that one of the first areas will be electronics, that it will be into just the new science. But science itself, it does not succeed. Just something or anything that because it is good, it's not going to succeed. It's a basic science, applied science, the engineering, the technology, the sustainable technologies, then the business world, then the acceptance by the public, and then the effect on the environment. These are all different words, and a successful product has to go through everything, every level. And it's never the same. It's never the shoot for the skies in the straight up. We make, and at the end, whatever is better, whatever is more efficient, whatever is more competitive will succeed, and that's pretty much it. Nanomedicine is medicine. We've had this discussion basically doing this work, and it's not just application of technology, but just like at this meeting, we've seen that the major medical problems that helps directing the research. So it's a two-way road, and whatever succeeds also will be better, will be there. If it's 10 cents, great. If it's 500 that you can afford it, that's great too. That's my comment.
Okay, Beat?
Well, Marianne, maybe this is a naive question, but after what Rezi says, he says, we want to do nanomedicine, and nanomedicine will change medicine. Is it in industry, in large industry, the desire just to develop drugs and see that the benefits, the financial benefits is big, and you are hesitant for that reason towards new technologies? I mean, you could think about a model where all of a sudden those who have the money to do huge trials where Bart says, I'm dying because I cannot do it. How would be a bridge between the face of the industry, of the large industry, that would understand that there is a huge chance maybe to really not translate, but to change medicine? He says, Rezi talks about changing something in medicine in general.
Okay, I'm not sure which bit of that to answer, but I think in terms of the industry, we look at different approaches, and you would treat projects in the same way. So, you know, we have a couple of nano projects in our portfolio. I talked about one of those, but that has to balance with the rest of the portfolio. For a nano project, you tend to, it costs more upfront because we're trying to finalize the formulation and the process optimization, because I don't think we really understand our critical quality attributes, and therefore that we need to front load prior to that you do for another molecule. So we tend to sink a lot of the development costs from a CMC perspective early on, as opposed to maybe in phase 2 when you've got proof of concept in the clinic. So if you're looking at if you're a big pharma with a portfolio, you've got to you look at the whole portfolio, and you don't want to put all your risk on something that's untried in the clinic. So I think there is a bit of a balance. I think if the preclinical body of evidence is there, we will look at a nano project just as we would look at a standard project as well. So I don't think there's a big difference. But then you actually look at your probabilities of success and where you're going to spend your money to try and balance that portfolio. I don't know if that answers that question, but gives it maybe a slightly different perspective.
Not fully. I mean, Rezi, say again what you just said 5 minutes ago. When you say, sorry?
I say, but I'll say it also a little bit differently. I agree with you in some aspect. I mean, no one cares from the point of view of whoever going to distribute the drug or, I don't know, do for you whatever, they don't care if it's a nano drug or whatever drug. That's not the point. The point, they want to sell something good that will be beneficial, and what I'm saying is the nano drug, is the fact that it's a nano drug, have a chance to make it a better drug, a different drug from the regular one. I stress the different, so better and different, and that's what we should stress. So it will be evaluated as a drug by its own right, not because it's a nano drug. Because it's a nano drug, it's better. That's so we have to separate between the two. And that's the way FDA treated it. FDA said a drug is a drug is a drug. I mean, call it whatever you want. So we may look at some things, more things, you know, toxicology is more complex, whatever, but at the end, we want all the package. That's basically...
So if I could add just a little to that, and I fully agree, and you have to look at the risk-benefit, the medical need when you develop any drug, right? But I think a point to what you asked, Beat, is that naively, I think, some large companies are looking at the nanotechnology of nanomedicines as a platform that they will easily bring in to their manufacturing, because they will have to invest in manufacturing for scale. And I think the reality is that it's not that simple, right? And we've heard about different formulations of lipids and cations, et cetera, to deliver different APIs, so that when there's still this skepticism that relates to the manufacturing side and how I'm going to scale and what it's going to cost in terms of that investment and what impact that has on the bottom line of the company is always part of it, shareholder value. But I think, until there's one technology where it's one lipid or it's one machine that does everything, there's going to remain that skepticism of why am I investing in this? And how foreign is it to what I'm doing? And I'll go back to GMOs, because at one point I worked for a company developing vaccines that you could grow in a field of corn or a field of a plot of tomatoes, right? And there was no manufacturing person in any pharmaceutical company who wanted to deal with all of the issues about producing their API in a field of corn. It's just, so some of these things are so foreign that, you don't get buy-in across the entire company to say this is worth the investment. And the other thing about investing is push all of that risk out to these small companies and let them get it there and then bring it in when it's a product. I think that's the reality I've seen on both sides of the fence.
Okay, so we are running out of time. So now we close the session. Thank you very much for the vivid discussion, and we can now go into the next stage. So that's the keynote lecture starting at 11:50.